Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Voices and Global Net 21, and this is one of the many webinars we do, and they're webinars that look at issues that are global, national and local. And today we're going to look at an issue which is local, but it is national and it is around the world as well, and that is the whole issue of debt. And we're going to be interviewing Melanie Smith, who is a United Reform minister, and she, amongst a number of other churches, have set up an Enfield Churches Debt Centre because she believes, like many people do, that debt is going to be a huge problem for us in the future. It is already a problem now, and it's a problem because of poverty. It's a problem that's been made worse by the COVID crisis. And in the future, when we face really devastating issues like climate change, where people will be pushed into poverty, many people pushed into homelessness, debt is again going to be a problem. So it's not one that's going to go away, it's going to exist over time. So having advice centres and having support is really, really important. Okay, so let's begin by talking to Melanie and asking you first. I mean, you've got this joint church project which is called the Enfield Debt Churches Centre. Now, why have you decided to set this up? What's the background to that?
Well, I think, first of all, some people might ask the question, why is a church minister interested in debt? Well, initially, I want to say that this is a very personal issue for me. My parents struggled with debt for many, many years, not to the extent of needing doorstep lending, but there was a constant cloud over my childhood, not being able to go on school trips, being left out, having to be dressed from jumble sales, not being able to afford new fashion, those kind of things. And then when I left school at 16, I went to work for NatWest Bank. And I soon realised that if you have plenty of money, the bank would be very happy to lend you more at very favourable interest rates. If you had little or no money, then the cost of credit was far higher, the debt trap. And it was about that same time that I was learning about the international debt crisis, where the burden of debt on poor countries was absolutely crippling their development. So it's an issue that's always been of personal interest to me. But then, skipping many intervening years, I came to Enfield from Southend just over 2 years ago. Early on, myself and my husband, Mark, who is also a United Reformed Church minister, met with Emma, who works for the Enfield Town Schools Partnership. And after a good chat about links between faith and schools, at the end of the meeting, we asked her what she felt to be the single most pressing issue facing families in Enfield. And the answer was just one word: debt.
Okay, well let's go through it step by step and talk about it. I mean, one person who put a comment on Facebook already, I mean, was saying that debt is a real problem because there are sort of sharks out there as well who are going to take advantage of people who are in debt. There are dubious credit unions. There's some fantastic ones, and we have a fantastic one in Enfield, and there are people who charge huge interests. Is that something that, in a way, has made you think about trying to do something to help people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem that we face in this country at the moment, and I'm going to talk about a big issue now, and maybe not everyone will agree with me, but we've just got a problem of structural debt, that if you are a person who is on universal credit or is on the national minimum wage, you just cannot afford to live a full life. And to be able to do so, we are very much encouraged to lend money, to borrow money. And the lenders can make that very attractive. But the problem is, once you get into some debt, and your debts tend to grow, you don't ever tend to pay them off. My parents, as I know, they didn't start owing lots and lots of money, but it builds up because something always tends to go wrong. And of course, the COVID crisis is a case in point. People have not wanted to build up extra debts during this time, but that's absolutely been what's happened. Even just today in the Times, there's an article from the financial ombudsman who's basically saying that the number of complaints to the ombudsman has grown massively over the last few months, that people can't even afford to pay their insurance policies anymore. When you get to that situation, people have got they've got no solid base to go on. So anything that happens to a family, then they're going to have to borrow more and more money. And doorstep lending, some of the shops that offer I can't remember the name of the shop, but offer credit on hire purchase that's become more popular in the high street with really, really very high interest rates. And if your sofa has been ruined, do you just sit on a hard dining chair, or do you buy a new sofa? You buy a new sofa and you're further into debt.
When you spoke to Emma, did you think that debt was a particular problem in Enfield? And is it an overall problem in the borough, or are there certain areas in Enfield that are more affected than others?
It's hard at the moment to get accurate, up-to-date figures. I've been able to get them from 2017 from a fabulous debt charity called Step Change, and it reckons that back in 2017, and we know that things have got worse since then, but back then there were over 31,000 people in Enfield. That's 1 in 10 people in Enfield with problem debt. That, if you actually look at the figures, was £82 million worth of problems in Enfield alone. And if that debt wasn't needing to be serviced, imagine what £82 million worth of boost to Enfield's economy could be. What's interesting about Enfield in particular is that it's actually more unsecured debt than the national average, and it seems to be more of a result of relationship breakdown than in some other areas of London, and a high proportion of people who are in debt are lone parents. I can't break that down into individual wards, but the problem in Enfield is very much to do with relationship breakdown, lone parents, and unsecured debt.
Okay, so you're going to set up this, debt centre. Now, will that be one that just provides help and advice and support, or is it one that will campaign as well? I know that you're talking to Feryal Clark, the MP, about the COVID debt cancellation possibility and her interest in that. So, what do you think that the centre will do?
Well, Enfield Churches Debt Centre is partnering with a charity called CAP, Christians Against Poverty. Now, that's the charity that Martin Lewis, the money savings expert, has commended. Martin is, in fact, of the Jewish faith. And so to have somebody from a different faith commending a Christian charity, I think is high acclaim indeed. Now, CAP works really hard with individuals to get them out of debt. They offer a free debt restructuring service, whereas many debt restructuring services you have to pay something for. So there's a huge benefit for turning to CAP, as well as the Enfield Churches Debt Centre setting up. Enfield Vineyard Church is also setting one up, and the Jubilee Church, through a slightly different organisation, has also got one of these already up and going, and which is brilliant. And then there's other charities such as Step Change, of course, Sisters Advice, Enfield Council you can get information of. But I think that there is this real move that each of us, whilst doing our little bits of work where we can do them, with whom we can do them with, I think we are trying to speak with each other, join together, involve more in campaigning. It's Desmond Tutu, I think it was, who said that if you see a dead person in the river, then you need to ask, not just pulling them out the river to save them, you've got to go further upstream to work out why they're in the stream in the first place. And so there is this huge need to actually tackle some of the bigger problems surrounding debt for our nation and for the world.
Okay, I mean, maybe we could look at some of those, but you mentioned the Christians Against Poverty. Will they provide a sort of backup support system for you, and do they do that for other debt advice centres as well?
So they'll be providing Enfield Churches Debt Centre and also the Enfield Vineyards Debt Centre backup. So effectively what we do is that we will actually hopefully employ somebody to begin with, probably part-time, because cost of employment is quite high. So we'll employ somebody to work as a debt centre leader, and they will take on clients. They will work through the finances individually with people, working out all their debts, and then the debt centre leader doesn't actually contact all the creditors individually, but we refer it to CAP centrally up in Bradford, as it happens, and they contact all of the lenders, all the creditors, and work out which can be cancelled, which can be deferred, and we are able to present a repayment programme to our clients, and it has a huge level of success, one of the highest levels of success of any of the debt rescheduling services.
So you've got churches involved in this. It's a partnership. How many churches have come on board for this in Enfield?
It's changing all the time. I think we're up to 13 or 14 that have pledged either one-off annual sums or monthly sums to support that. We're having a launch event next Monday in the evening at 7:30, to which people of a church background, of non-church background, local businesses, everyone's invited to come along to find out what we'll be doing, and there will be an ask to support us financially for that, but also we're looking for a treasurer. We're looking for people to help befriend the people who are in debt, because being in debt is more than just having the worry of not being able to repay over your head. It is one of the main causes of social exclusion pre-COVID, because people can't afford to go out. People are more stressed, more anxious. The mental health issues are really, really heavy toll on the community that is facing debt problems. And so there's loneliness, exclusion, a sense of helplessness. So people need a friendship. So we're looking for all sorts of help from the community. We don't want to do this alone. The services are absolutely open to anyone of faith or no faith or any other faith. That's given regardless. So it's a service that, although the churches are taking the lead on it, it's a service by and for the whole community.
Okay, one particular question has come up, which I'm sure you might expect, and is why do you need a specific Christian organisation when there's a credit union, CAB, the Vineyard, and so on, other debt organisations? Why a specifically Christian one?
In many ways, you don't need a specifically Christian one. However, the churches have other people like me who are interested in helping people for any number of reasons. That might be personal. They may know people who are in debt themselves, and it's a blessing that because we're in a church, we are able to get organised. And what I would say is that we need, sadly, we need all the different organisations that can help to help. We are working closely with Citizens Advice. We're speaking to the council about these issues. We're working with the North London Credit Union. We're in touch with all of the agencies that we can find to be in touch with. There's going to be more out there. And the need is so great that if a secular organisation was to get in partnership with other secular organisations to create a debt centre, I would be 100% behind it personally. anyone that is able to organise these things and do them properly and help, then I would very much encourage that. The churches are a conduit for that to happen because we've got structures that enable us to do that.
Okay, so once you're up and really running, what will you actually do? Will you, for example, act as a mediator between those in debt and those who, offer money? Will you be helping with people with universal credit and so on? What will you actually be doing?
The CAP part of it, the Christians Against Poverty part of what we do, is very much about the individual debt restructuring. At the moment, we've only got our status as a charity a couple of months ago, and our work at the moment is very much to get that going, because that is the urgent need within Enfield. In terms of then not making sure that we're not just doing the sticky plasters, but we're looking at the reasons for the problem, then yes, we do hope to be campaigning. We do hope to be engaging with other agencies to work more holistically. And of course, we've also been working and looking and talking to places like the Food Bank and other agencies that are all involved with poverty issues to try and join up as far as we can, ensuring that we're just not looking at one element on its own. So we're very happy to work with anybody and everybody to ensure that people who are in debt, so somebody might come to us with a debt problem and it's obvious that actually their cupboards are empty. So the first thing that we would do would be issue them with a food bank voucher. It may also be obvious that they are facing difficulties with, say, not having a warm winter coat. We can try and help sort those initial needs out as well. And although we may not be qualified to help with universal credit in itself, again, because working with other agencies, we can put them in touch. Signposting is what we like to call it, but we would very much part of speaking with clients would be signposting them to help with the whole range of problems they're experiencing.
So if you said you'll be looking at debt restructuring, does that mean you'll be helping people with personal budgeting and maybe even at some point running courses about that?
Yeah, in fact, the personal courses is a thing that happens already. When we spoke to Emma from the Enfield Town Schools Partnership, one of the first things we did is we discovered that there are money management courses, CAP money management courses, that were being run in the centre of Enfield and also down in the Palmer's Green area. And so we got one of those up and running straight away. We're hoping to run more money management courses starting in January. Probably we're going to have to do them online, although we do feel that they're great to do in person. So that's all part of it. As part of the wider package of what we might be able to offer, there are things such as job clubs that can be part of additional offerings that we might be able to do, cookery courses, because of course a lot of people in poverty have to turn to the cheapest foods that they can cook, which is often junk food, which has got real health implications and well-being implications for families. With simple cooking lessons, being able to turn cheap raw ingredients into nutritious meals isn't a skill that everybody has. So to be able to help with those sorts of issues as well should hopefully become part of everything that we offer.
Okay, and you mentioned that you're working in partnership with a number of organisations. So it's part of what you do, setting up a network of organisations that can help. I mean, not just the normal ones like CAB and so on, but a community group like React in Edmonton that maybe themselves offering advice to their people. Are you trying to build that sort of network up?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. It's actually been a strange thing. When I've been a minister now for about 8 years. And when I came into the ministry, I had no idea that this would become such a significant part of my life, my ministry. I assumed it would be very much church-based, based on pastoral care for the membership, based on worship, and also with a little bit of work in the international arena, because I'm very, very keen on international development issues. But when I started working first in Southend and then in Enfield, I realised that one of the things that you can do as a church minister is you are quite often pushing on open doors to network with other organisations and other people, Christian organisations, other faith, through Enfield Faith Forum, through different public institutions, that you've actually got a way of speaking and joining and networking. So when we spoke to Emma, although she said the problem is debt, she had no idea that there were money management courses in Enfield already. So we was able to join those dots. So there is a huge need within Enfield, within any place, for different organisations to learn about each other and join the dots, because there is a lot of help out there. We just don't know who is doing what, and finding those links and signposting, talking to each other is a really important task for people to do.
I mean, getting social mapping in Enfield is something that's sorely needed, and I know Emma Rigby is trying to do that as well, which is really great. I mean, you talked about linking with food banks and so on. You're involved in starting another project called the Free Little Pantry, which really relates very much to people who are facing food poverty and debt. How's that coming along?
Well, the Little Free Pantry is such a simple idea, and it is devastating, the fact that they have worked so well and that are needed in the first place. As you might know, Francis, that when you set up a food bank, most of them work on either a limit of number of items that you can take in a week or on a visit, or on a voucher system. And of course, it relies on the person needing food or their representative going to the food bank and actually collecting food, or the food being delivered during, effectively working hours. The Little Free Pantry, in its most basic form, is a cupboard on a street, and it is just filled with basic essentials, whether that's pasta and beans or whether that's nappies. And people don't need a voucher, and literally they can come along and just take what they need. And if other people in the community feel able to, they can just put back what they don't need. So it's open at 24/7. There's no need for any referral, and that it's just a really simple idea. And so I learned about the idea first in Southend. I've seen it working in Chelmsford as well, and we're hoping to launch it very, very soon in Enfield, hopefully in Ponders End before the end of the year. And we're very grateful that we've got a team of volunteers that are willing to help make sure that it runs smoothly. We would expect, sadly, that at some point someone might just empty out all the contents, even though they may not need it all. We might even expect some vandalism, but we expect them. We know it could happen, but on the whole, even in really difficult places, that after a few months they tend to settle down, and vandalism, if it happens, tends to be very, very rare. So we've got a great hope that starting this is in Ponders End. We've got people all over Enfield that are quite interested in the idea. It doesn't take much organisation, it doesn't take much management, it really doesn't take hardly any cost either, and so hopefully there will be little free pantries springing up around Enfield within the next few months, which just fills in an extra part of the equation. Although everyone now knows about food banks, and everyone should know there is absolutely no shame in going to a food bank, that can still be an issue for some people, whereas going to a little free pantry, it's far more anonymous and people may feel more able to do that. it's always a good tip, in fact, to put a few books in the little free pantry, because then if people feel that they are embarrassed about taking food, they may not be so embarrassed about looking as though they've taken or given a book. So there's ways of making it look very discreet, and yeah, just such a simple idea to be shared, and anyone can do it. Anyone can.
It's a great idea, and there was a lot of interest in it when we did the webinar. And you mentioned, getting volunteers. When it comes to the debt centre, will that be, staffed by volunteers only, or will you have professional staff as well?
As I say, we are hoping to employ someone who needs to be trained up, because although they will not be directly delivering the paperwork, they do need to be very aware of what advice they can give and what advice they can't give on a legal basis. This is a very tightly controlled part of volunteer and the voluntary sector. So we do actually have to train someone very, very well to be the leader of the debt centre. If somebody is looking to volunteer and doesn't need a salary, we'd be very happy to hear from anybody interested in that. But we are looking for volunteers to help with the management, help with fundraising, help with befriending people. There are plenty of opportunities. And again, if we get some of the added on services, such as cookery courses, CV clubs, job clubs, those starting, then we would be looking for more volunteers.
The danger, though, with volunteers, of course, is that you really do have to train them, don't you? Because if they get bad advice, bad debt advice, that could be worse than giving no advice at all. So do you have a sort of training regime that you're developing for volunteers?
Absolutely. And luckily, because we're partnering with one organisation to begin with, they provide all the materials. Volunteering nowadays, sadly, isn't just a case of being keen and turning up. We need to make sure there's a volunteer agreement in place, a volunteer role, that there needs to be DBS safeguarding checks for individuals. It is a commitment, to be perfectly honest with you, but people on the whole are good, and if they are wanting to help, there's probably a volunteer role that they can do that we can help them into and make sure they're trained up to be able to do well and competently.
Some people might argue, of course, that what you're doing is very fine, but it's firefighting, and that the real problem is structural. Do you sort of understand that, and do you think you have to confront that as well?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you mentioned earlier that Feryal Clark, the MP for Enfield North, has been supportive of the idea of a Jubilee Fund. Jubilee Fund, yeah, it is a Jubilee Fund, but it's a Jubilee Fund for following COVID, which is about asking the Chancellor to help write off some of the debts that people have incurred directly to do with extra burdens during the crisis. But the problem, as you quite rightly say, is structural, and you can't just keep on paying off debts without tackling some of the underlying causes for that. So, for instance, universal credit, it isn't enough for people to live on without needing some money from elsewhere, which for most people is having to borrow money. Rent poverty, fuel poverty, food poverty, structural injustices like health provision and education, which especially for our BAME communities can prolong debt crises for families because of educational levels, because of taking more time off sick, because of health issues. They all need to be tackled. Now, I would admit, and this is definitely a different webinar to the one we're doing today, but the idea of a universal basic income would be one that would help that structural issues, which would help prevent people going into so much debt. So there are structural changes that could happen that would be affordable for the country with just seen what a magic money tree that we've got during COVID. If beforehand we'd already had universal basic income, then we would not have had such a need for the furlough scheme, for some of the other schemes the Chancellor has had to find and come up with. So tackling those structural injustices is really essential if we're going to solve the debt crisis in this country.
These things that come from outside, like inequality, like COVID and so on, is making the problem really, really acute, which means, I'd like to ask you about climate change. I mean, climate change is going to happen now and gather pace right through the century, and it's going to have a real impact on people's financial situation. Are you factoring that into what you do in terms of what the Debt Centre can offer?
As far as we can. As yet, we don't really know the impacts. Mentioned it briefly, but the Financial Services Ombudsman has actually said, and this is a quote, that some said they could no longer afford their monthly payments for insurance policies. Now, if you just think back to the floods that we've had in the past few years, they are definitely on track to get worse. If you are living in a vulnerable area and there is a flood and you've not been able to pay your insurance, the only solution for many, many people is more loans, more doorstep lending. So climate change will have a very, very severe impact in this country on the debt crisis. We have not got the ability to set up a fund to be able to pay for people's insurance policies. So it's got to be tackled in some way. But just to say, and this is something that I'm interested in that I haven't explored, and therefore if there is anyone out there that's also interested in this, I'd love to hear about it. But some people may be aware that debt can be sold off by lenders in bulk at a very, very low rate. There are churches and organisations, especially in the States, but it's also happened here, that have bought off bad debt from lending companies and then have crowdfunded those sums to basically be able to write off debt. I would be very interested to hear from anybody who would be wanting to find out more about that, because with crowdfunding, you could actually make a real difference to people's lives and write off their bad debt. I throw that in as a little extra there. But yeah, the structural injustices are enormous.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, there may be people who could give advice about crowdfunding and so on. That would be great. Your point about basic income, by the way, Ros Lucas has just said, she's just heard a reference to it. At present, there are over 100 MPs cross-party considering that. And I've just seen recent polls which said that support for universal basic income is growing in both the UK and the USA because of COVID. So, things are happening there very fast. Okay, well, we've sort of come to the end of this. You talked a great deal about it. If anybody wanted to help you, give you support, volunteer, or just find out what you're doing more than that we've had time to do here today, where would they go to find out?
Sadly, at the moment, your best place to visit is Facebook. Look at Enfield Churches Debt Centre on Facebook. Then there'll be contact details. You can email us from that. Here's an email address. We haven't got a website yet. In fact, another volunteer role, if someone wants to help look after a website, set up a website and help manage our social media, that would be a huge help to us. Because at the moment, although we have got lots of churches supporting us, you can imagine that churches at the moment, we're having to learn a heap new amount of things to do with social media that haven't necessarily been as big for us before. So yeah, anyone who can help us with that for the Debt Centre, that would be a wonderful volunteer role that we'd be very keen to hear about.
Okay, well, thank you very much for doing that, Melanie. And I'm sure if anyone out there can help, they'll get in touch with you, and I hope they will, and we'll disseminate this webinar as far as we can. So, I mean, I think it's been interesting because I think what you're doing is very important, as all the other organisations, what they're doing is important as well. And, I wish you every success in it, and I hope it will help a great many people. And with the Little Pantry project as well, you certainly have got, your feet on the ground running. And I think, it's a credit to you that you're doing it and all the people that help you. So thank you very much for doing this interview today, Melanie. And we'll finish this interview now.